CrowdStrike presents Driven in 60. Our digital world is more than just interconnected, it's interdependent. And because of that, security is a top concern for every organization. The Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team knows they're a potential target for a host of digital attacks, which is why they leverage the CrowdStrike Falcon platform to deploy end-to-end security solutions. CrowdStrike revolutionized cybersecurity by harnessing the speed and power of the cloud to identify and stop the most sophisticated cyber attacks. Our cloud-native Falcon platform protects and defends organizations against increasingly complex threats, so you can have the peace of mind to focus on your business momentum, not what's trying to stop it. That's protection that powers you. To learn more and to try CrowdStrike Falcon free today, visit crowdstrike.com/XM. All right, Gearheads, we are very excited to have our guest because he is all over motorsports, all over the planet. Tom Gaymor, welcome to Speed City.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off by talking about all the things that you do. I know you do a little Indycar here from the States, but what else do you do?
Yeah, so essentially this year I've got two main pillars to my work. One is Formula One and the other is Indycar. So I'm covering Formula One for the world feed, so F1TV. And that's as a lead commentator alongside Jolyon Palmer and the team. And I'm doing Sky Sports F1's IndyCar coverage as well. So two fantastic championships, two championships going from strength to strength. And I'm really lucky to be involved in both of them. I do one or two other things as well, but those are the main pillars, as I say.
Well, that's awesome. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to have you today is because we're halfway through the Formula One season, if you can believe it. And we want to just kind of take a pause and let's see where we are and what we might expect to see what's happening. But Jonathan Green, how are you, buddy?
I'm good, man. Looking forward to talking to my buddy Tom. Tom, a bit like myself, got a good background. He's another two-wheel and four-wheel guy, and is right on the hub of all motorsport things. And so, yeah, looking forward to actually catching up.
Well, you and Tom go way back, don't you?
Yeah, we've known each other a while, and we've kind of crossed paths. We haven't really worked together, but we've crossed paths on many occasions. And he's done some superbikes. I've done some superbikes. He's done Formula One. Blah blah blah. So yeah, we've run in the same waters.
Well,
I was even in your favorite cafe this morning, Jonathan. So
oh no, did you have the full Monty?
No, I'd be asleep. You don't leave this cafe hungry, that's for sure.
If you have the full Monty, John, that's it. You're asleep for the rest of the day.
Okay, well, y'all got to tell us the name of this place, so if we're in London, we can look it up.
Yeah, Chino's, Southwest London. It's not far from Hampton Court Palace, actually, so if you're into your history.
There you go.
Nice. Well, let's talk Formula One. Tom, what do you think of the season so far? Just a quick 10,000-foot view.
Yeah, just to summarize it, essentially, it's very much how we ended last year, in the sense that things changed so quickly in 3 or 4 races. That was the theme of last year. And that's the theme again, albeit with a wholesale shift in regulations and how we generate grip and go about things. If you look at how quick the cars were at the beginning of the year, Ferrari versus a Red Bull that had a few reliability woes, to then what happened in that midpoint of the season. So from Imola to Miami to Spain and then Azerbaijan and Canada, it was very much, wow, what happened to Ferrari? That not only did their pace drop off, but they've got the reliability woes now that Red Bull had at the beginning of the year. And then we go to Austria, a big weekend for Charles last time out. And where was the mid-race pace for Red Bull? That's the first time we've seen this year Red Bull go missing in terms of their race pace. And it was a shock. So are we now off the back of a resurgence from Charles and Carlos, 2 wins in a row for Ferrari? You know, can they go to France? We've just had the first free practice, Charles going very, very well again. Can they make it 3 wins in 3? And that's really pivotal for me, because it just carries on that trend, that continuation whereby we all fall into the trap of going, well, 3 races now, Red Bull are unstoppable. And then all of a sudden, here come Ferrari again. You know, it's a long, long year. We're basically halfway through the season, and so much can still change from here. Where are Mercedes tracking? There's a lot of noise around Mercedes improving their pace from Silverstone. Austria didn't really suit them, but they had a lot of confidence coming into the French Grand Prix that they, with their upgrades, are going to be able to challenge Ferrari and Red Bull. And that's going to complicate it then for those two. So there's some wonderful dynamics forming, and it's really, really hard to predict. And that's the one thing I think as genuine fans that we all love. It's one of the reasons why I love IndyCar, because it's so hard to predict. And we've got that sort of theme starting to develop, albeit a smaller spectrum of drivers, but it's hard to pick who's going to be on top at the beginning of the weekends.
I love that, because that's been my favorite thing, the unpredictability. At the beginning, it was, is Ferrari going to run away with this? And then it's Red Bull, and now it's pivoting back. And I'm really looking forward to what you said about Mercedes this weekend. But just thinking big picture, they've been very consistent all season long with points and creeping up with a little more pace all season long. But what about you, Jonathan?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I love your assessment, Tom, and you didn't get to Mercedes until right at the end, which is fascinating, because I'm excited by the fact that we do genuinely have potentially a three-way battle now, which we haven't had in so many years. And instead of talking about who's going to beat Mercedes, we're finally talking about, will Mercedes cut it, you know, and get up there with Red Bull and Ferrari. So, you know, when we think about our race in Austin in October, it's mouthwatering, because by then we should see the very best of what the 22 cars offer. And I think the championship will be so close, because, you know, forget the top three. You've got McLaren are going to win something. AlphaTauri with Gasly could win something. Alfa Romeo could do something. You know, Haas might even score a podium or two. You know, there are people that take points away now this year compared to what was before, just a Mercedes kind of Ferrari thing, or a Mercedes Red Bull thing. And so I'm excited by how this season could pan out into a possible three-way battle for the championship come Abu Dhabi.
Tom, what about the Haas F1 team, the recent resurgence, and moving up to from 9th to 7th? I mean, where do you think, how high do you think they can go? You think they can grab another place?
With no upgrades as well. Let's be fair.
Yeah.
As we transition into the European season, through the European season, all of the noise is about upgrades. What are you bringing to Barcelona? What are you developing? Silverstone saw a raft of upgrades as well. Haas, they've barely bought anything, and they're tracking around continuity, making sure they go in the right direction. We've seen one or two teams lose their way. AlphaTauri have lost their way, for example. And it's interesting to see how Haas, with that stability, with that engineering understanding and setup that they have, moving in the right direction. They've got two cars at it now as well, because you've got to give Mick Schumacher a huge amount of praise. Off the back of his crash in Monaco, he was under a huge amount of pressure. He was publicly criticised, if you like, by the team boss Gunther Steiner. And as a young man and somebody who's not quite done it yet in Formula One, the impact that has on you psychologically can break you. And for Mick Schumacher, he's come back and he's really pushing Kevin Magnussen. Now, if you speak to Jolyon Palmer, who's had Kevin Magnussen as a teammate, you know, Kevin is seriously quick. He's a benchmark that any team would be happy to have in their car. So Mick doing a job on Kevin is worth talking about. And he's done just that. I mean, he's had his best two results, I think an 8th and a 6th, the last two races. So I'm really excited to see where Mick Schumacher can go as well. And that complete package is an exciting package at the moment, because that midfield is almost like a piranha pit. If you just don't quite get it right, you can be out in Q1. And then if you do get it right, you're starting in the top 10 and through to Q3. And it's tiny, tiny, small margins. Look at Aston Martin, for example, who have a whole host of upgrades, feel really confident in their car, but have been knocked out in Q1 for the last however many Grand Prix. So it's really close. And leading on to surprises, and I'm sure you'll come to this, Williams, look how strong Williams are now with their upgrades. And Albon, they really think they've got a top 10 car now. And they haven't been a top 10 car. Look at Albon, 18th in points, 20th in points. You know, if they can push in, then that's going to give the likes of Haas, Alfa Romeo, Aston Martin, McLaren, Alpine a serious headache.
Yeah, you know, you've just summed it up. I mean, that's how open it is. But, you know, just mentioning Haas and mentioning the American kind of side of it, obviously, on this side of the pond, we're desperately interested in all things American, and Williams is one of those things. We've got Logan Sargent, and obviously with Dalton Capital and so on. So we're watching their progress. But one thing that seems to have gone quiet, and Tom, maybe you can give us a sort of European perspective on it. But one thing that seemed to have gone quiet is Andretti's bid to try to get into Formula One, and obviously that's close to the heart of race fans here who follow Indy and follow Michael Andretti and obviously Mario. But what's your take on what's happening with that bid for Andretti to get another franchise? And I say franchise because that is seemingly now how Formula One is set up.
That's the new phrase, isn't it?
Yeah. But what's your take on what's going on with Andretti?
I think there's the most important thing is funding. Anything that underpins a franchise or a push into Formula One has to have big funding behind it. So that has to be realised. And, you know, Andretti have been really buoyant and vocal, saying that they've got the funding, that it's there, it's not a concern. So that is the first concern, if we're to believe them, and there's no reason why we shouldn't, that they have that. It's down to Formula One and the teams and everything else to make it happen. I think it'll be an absolute travesty if we don't see that opportunity happen, because if there's any team, family, or setup that lives and breathes motorsport, it's that Andretti fold. That they just get it, and for the fans and for what they can bring to the sport, I just think it'd be such a mistake if their opportunity isn't realised, if the funding is as strong as they say it is.
Well, and also there's a dynamic kind of taking place as well behind the scenes, and I say behind the scenes because it's quite public, but you know, Zach Brown is bringing on Pato O'Ward. He's bringing on Colton Herta. He's giving tests. He's Alex Palou is in the middle of a fight for where he's going to be in Indy. But there's some really nice dynamics of young drivers, all capable and wanting to go to Formula One, and getting a sort of B grade test series via McLaren for Andretti.
Yeah, it's interesting to see who they're aligning themselves with, because they were with Alpine, weren't they?
Yeah, they've got Renault contract. Yeah.
So that's, you know, essentially where they need to be. But Zach is acquiring a huge amount of talent at McLaren. I'm not quite sure where they're all going to end up. I don't think they are either. That's the weird and wonderful thing about motorsport. But it is an important talking point that you raise around Colton testing the Formula One car at Portimao last week. Because Colton's the type of driver that can give team bosses a headache. And what I mean by that is we hero worship stories from the past. So Kimi Räikkönen, when he got in the Sauber and blew a lazy away within 10 laps, and, you know, Senna when he was and you know, that kind of stuff. Schumacher. And Colton is definitely a driver who has an unbelievable amount of natural talent. And he's one of those drivers that gets in a car and goes quick within 6 laps. He just does it, whatever you put him in. You could put him in a touring car, a sports car, a Formula One car, anything, and he'll go quick in it straight away. And that causes a headache for the likes of Zach and the engineers. And the feedback was really good from Colton. They've got a cue now, because that's going to put Pato O'Ward's nose out of joint. We saw when it was announced at the beginning of the year that Pato had a dip in his form, that he was upset with the dynamic and the situation. And now we've got the potential of Alex Palou coming into that fold as well. But all of this is relevant to Formula One, because for the first time over here, you've got Formula One journalists really talking about IndyCar, Sky Sports F1 personnel in their gallery meetings, talking about IndyCar, who are these drivers? What are they doing? Because it's not just F2 that's feeding up now into Formula One. You've got competition from across the pond, and you've got drivers going from Formula One to IndyCar, the possibility of IndyCar drivers going to Formula One. And if Andretti can get on the grid, there's no doubt in my mind that some of that talent that we've just mentioned should find themselves in an F1 seat with Andretti. I mean, Colton Herta is the logical example for it. He was he's contracted with Andretti to drive their IndyCar, but it's complicated now because he's been acquired by Zach, and there's no coincidence there. That's not a coincidence that's happened. That's to cover off different options.
Well, the first time I saw Colton Herta was the first weekend he was in IndyCar at a test here in Austin. And I was walking through the media center, and he hit the track, and just like you said, boom, he went straight to the top of the times. And I literally stopped and went, whoa, I got to sit down and watch this kid, because it was the first time he'd been on track went straight to the top of the times. So do you think that he could step in and be quick in an F1 car?
Unequivocally, he has that raw talent, and it's that type of impression that turns heads, and that's half the battle. It's been the same for decades. Racing drivers. Now, Colton's a rough diamond because there are parts of his game that he needs to improve, and he knows that, and it's been a difficult year for him at times, but his pace, no one can doubt. And they always say in Formula One, that's the bit that they can't teach you. So if you have that bit, they'll take a risk on you because they think that they can mold the rest of it. It's the Yuki Sonoda scenario, for example. It's like, the guy's got serious pace, but can we get everything else to work alongside that? And I think Colton very much is a driver that if he could get other parts of his game just to improve, and he's working hard on it, he could be a megastar. He's up there with the likes of Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc. When he was Lando Norris's teammate at Carlin in British Formula 4, he was every bit as quick as Lando. Lando was just a complete package. Colton was very green. And you can see what Lando is capable of doing and how high esteem he's held. I think Colton's not far behind that.
Well, guys, let's pivot back just to F1 a little bit, because we talked about Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes. We touched on McLaren, but let's talk McLaren and where do you think they are compared to where do you think they thought they'd be at this, the beginning of the season, Tom? You think they're achieving their goals?
Well, I think at the beginning of the year, they had that first test where everyone thought, wow, that's impressive. Then they went to the second test and everything fell away. And then they went to the first race and had all kinds of different problems. And it was a really difficult start for them. They've then come back, but I don't think it's necessarily the car making great strides. It's the tracks. So they are exposed on certain circuits. And when they're not at the circuits that highlight some of the challenges they've got, they tend to sort of make improvements forward. They are working really, really hard to try and make the changes that they need and maximize the car that they have underneath them. But if you look at what happened at Austria, they're nowhere near that because of some of the challenges that they were having technically. So their reliability, certainly in the first free practice where you saw issues with Ricciardo's rear wing, DRS, then Lando had his issues with the power unit, that kind of stuff. All of those things then exaggerate their problem. So if they can't get the stability and the reliability there, they've got no chance of showcasing their true ability. So I think, when you look at their performance at Austria, it's not that bad. They're further up the grid than that. What was pushing them back was some of their reliabilities. And they've talked a lot over the last few weekends or races about making sure that they have clean weekends. If they can have a clean weekend, then they're going to stand a chance of, really good points, top 10, that kind of stuff. But are they where Alpine are, or are they best of the rest? I don't think so yet.
Well, what about Daniel Ricciardo? I mean, it's just, if you had him scoring points at anywhere near the pace of Lando, they would have a bigger lead right now. They're tied with Alpine.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously they've had spikes of real performance, and Daniel has, I thought at the beginning of the year, closed the gap. He talks about closing the gap. I think he has. It's not as drastic as where it was, but in terms of how good Daniel Ricciardo is, you know, this is a guy who is very, very good. This is not a guy who has suddenly forgotten how to drive. I almost liken it to a golf swing. Because of the way the car has changed and the way the car is engineered, it just doesn't work for him. So he's having to change his golf swing, and it's the smallest of changes, but the difference between success and failure at the top level, we're talking about the very best drivers in the world, is so slight. Lando is, if you go to McLaren, they really rate Lando. I mean, they just, where he is and what he's capable of doing, and you saw that in Spain when he was ill, you know, this is a guy who's right there in terms of the next best young driver. And Daniel's finding it really hard. He's having to try and think about things. And when you're thinking about things, you're reactive, you're not proactive. And if you're reactive, you're behind the ball. And that's been the hardest thing for Lando. He just, not Lando, for Daniel. He just can't get the feel and the understanding of where he needs to be. And he looks lost. He says he's got thick skin, and he always goes about it with a smile on his face. But I bet you, as a human being, when he puts his head on the pillow at night, it's hard. It must be really hard for Daniel. And not quite knowing, he talks about going through the data and trying to continue to improve. That means he still doesn't know where the answer is. He's still working through it. And I think that's a very, very difficult and challenging place to be in. The constant noise around Zach acquiring all the super talent outside of Formula One is not going to help his situation, because, as I said, we're all human beings. The psychology there leads to sort of almost fearing failure, and he's going to be hurting, definitely.
He'll be in NASCAR with Raikkonen next year. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Tom, that was brilliant. I love the way you broke that down, because you're right. A golf swing is a great comparison. He's thinking about it now. He's not just getting in the car. I mean, it's almost the polar opposite of Lando right now. Lando's having fun. He looks like he's, almost the Daniel Ricciardo before, because he's just having fun and, using his talent and having a great time. So that's a great assessment. I'm interested to see how this all breaks down. But let's look at the next team on the list here. I jumped with Haas earlier because it's Haas, but let's look at Alpine, because they've been impressive lately, haven't they, Tom?
Yeah, definitely. And both drivers, Ocon is, I think, underrated. He's a very, very talented driver. And, Fernando Alonso needs no introduction. And if you look at Fernando in Canada and, some of the things that have gone wrong for Fernando over the last however many races, it could have been so much better. I mean, he is really consistent in terms of his finishing positions, and that's a legacy of where the car is. But, he'll be disappointed not to have a rostrum, and that is indicative of how good Alpine's car has been at times. And certainly seeing everything fall away in Canada for Fernando Alonso was almost painful to watch. They had a better car underneath them and a better opportunity there than the results showed. So, yeah, for Fernando Alonso, it's exciting to see him back at it, isn't it? I mean, he's somebody that just... It's remarkable how hungry he is, and this is a guy who races week in and week out in the midfield. Now that midfield is not frightening, but you've got to have your knees and elbows out. Some of the front runners suddenly drop into the midfield, don't qualify well. They don't fancy it at turns 1 and 2 because they're like, whoa, what's going on here? Because it's tough through those first couple of corners. We saw that from Lewis Hamilton at times this year.
Yeah.
Like, oh, what's going on? These guys are crazy. And, Fernando Alonso is leading the charge there. He's the first to sort of roll his sleeves up, get his elbows out and knees out, and he loves it. And, his age with his experience, it's fantastic to see.
Yeah, they don't want to fall back into the clutches of Alonso and Magnussen and all those guys. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom, I know you got a weekend off, but why don't we just let our audience know, because some will, some won't. But tell us about F1 Pro, because I'm really enjoying the coverage. You and Jolien, you're back in action in Hungary. Tell us a little bit about where we can find you and tune in, and what that's like to be part of that scene with Formula One.
Yeah, being part of F1 Pro is an honor and a privilege. It's great to be working in Formula One, great to be working around so many wonderful people. And it's not just in the commentary box. I share that with Will Buxton and Ben Edwards and obviously Jolyon Palmer, but it's Sam Collins, it's Laura Winter, it's Rosanna Tennant, it's all the people, Craig Scarborough, it's all the people behind the scenes working in the gallery, the producers. They're wonderful, they're creative. We have content and footage that other broadcasters don't get. We can bring in lots of different bits of information and data, and it's a wonderful way to watch Formula One, and you're almost learning on the job as a broadcaster as well, because there's just so much information, and being able to work with all of those people is a real privilege. Now, it is restricted where you are in the Globe Matters, and we're looking to, or the powers to be at F1 will be looking to improve the digital offering as we move from that, from our generation, should I say, to the next gen who are watching everything digitally and through apps and tablets and all kinds of different things, away from the linear TV. But Formula One will be working hard to improve that offering. But you can get F1 Pro in the States, and we love bringing Formula One to absolutely everybody who's tuned in, who subscribes. So if you've not heard of it, please do check that out. Just Google F1TV. You can see that on the Formula One website as well. And it's worth every bit of investment in terms of paying the subs. Definitely, I can confirm that. And the footage that you get and some of the information that you get and the insights, you won't get anywhere else.
Absolutely, it is a fantastic product. I can't imagine doing what we do without F1 TV, to be honest with you. It's a great resource for us. And you guys do a great job. It's impressive.
Thank you.
Well, let's keep on going down the grid a little bit, because Alfa Romeo next on our list. And boy, Bottas has been fun to watch this year too, hasn't he?
Yeah, Valtteri's been at it. He's
relaxed, isn't he?
Yeah, it's Bottas 2.0 or whatever we're calling it. He's relaxed, definitely. And again, I talked about some of the woes that Fernando's had for Bottas and Joe. It's been a case of reliability. If they could eliminate some of the issues, they came to the grid with a wonderful car. I think they were the only car that was underweight at the beginning of the year, and they brought some really good upgrades, but it's just the reliability that hampers them. It's such a small window of opportunity. We've had 2 sprint weekends, for example. You only get 1 practice before qualifying. So if you do have reliability woes, it does set you off on the wrong foot. And we talked about how much of a piranha pit that midfield is. If you don't quite get it right, it's really hard. And, Bottas has done a good job. I talked about Mick Schumacher being one of the drivers who's tracking back in the right direction. If you look at the deficits or the deltas between drivers in qualifying, there was a big delta and deficit between Bottas and Joe and Magnussen and Schumacher. Now Schumacher's tracking back in the right direction, and Joe's doing exactly the same thing. He did a really good job of bouncing back of that horrible accident that he had at Silverstone, and they've been really impressed with him. So, Alfa's definitely, if you look at how many struggles they've had over the years, it's fantastic to see them with this new set of rules, interpreting those well and coming to the grid with a fantastic car.
Yeah, no doubt. And you talk about this midfield, they're one of those teams that could move up and down. We don't know where. That's the beautiful thing that we talked about at the beginning of the show, with the uncertainty that could happen with them too. So I'm anxious to see that. We're now to Haas as we go down the points, and we talked about them, but I want to touch on something you said about Mick Schumacher, and that is how he struggled. It wasn't that long ago, Tom, we were talking about, is he even going to be able to stay in Formula One?
Yes.
We've come full circle on him, and he has earned every bit of this new praise, because he's clearly now right on pace with Magnussen, as you said, who is a great benchmark. But also, haven't you seen the shift in his attitude, where he is aggressive and ultra confident. Going
Chip
back
off
to
the old block, we say in England.
yeah, there you go. I mean, he does sound like his father, doesn't he, Tom?
I think so. And it's not a case of just looking at results. He hasn't nicked a result here and there in the last 2 races. It's the complete weekend. And I think that's what underpins and emphasizes the praise is right the way through the practice sessions, qualifying and the race. He's been very, very quick and very, very impressive. He's been clean. He's almost led the team. And there was that point in the midpoint of the Austria weekend after the sprint race where he was turning around and saying, well, listen, why didn't you order K-Mag out the way? I'm quicker than him. And I thought, crikey, that's a bold statement and a bit of a role reversal. And I hope that he can walk the walk, having taught the talk. And he did just that on the Sunday. He cruised up to the back of K-Mag, past him and cleared off. And that was very much, for me, an important point where he said, listen, that's my coming of age. I told you I can do this. I've just gone and done it. Now let's push on. And I definitely think that he is, he's over that threshold now where the doubts are moving away. He understands what he's got to do. He's getting it. And he's going to be a thorn in the side of K-Mag throughout. He's not going to wipe the floor with Kevin Magnussen because we talked about how good he is. But, he's going to be a thorn in the side of K-Mag. And that's what you want in that sort of team dynamic. You want drivers a bit like Ocon and Alonso and to really push each other along. A bit like George Russell and Lewis Hamilton, they're sort of duking at it. That really drives the team forward.
Yeah, that would be exciting to see where they are, They were almost mentor, new driver. They're shifting to where Magnussen could get a little bristly. We could see that. So I would look forward to that. Well, let's look at AlphaTauri. It's funny looking where they are now behind the Haas F1 team. They've had such great success. Gasly has looked so good these last couple of seasons, and here they are sitting in 8th place right now. Yeah,
they're a team that have not surprised me, but they've been right there and thereabouts, given where they've been over the years. You actually look at AlphaTauri as a team that could spring a surprise, and they were quick at the beginning of the year. A couple of top 10s for Pierre Gasly, and Yuki was definitely closing the gap, but they've gone missing. They go missing at times, and I think that's been their biggest challenge is getting that continuity together and understanding. They talked about needing the upgrade. They got a big upgrade this weekend for France, like a huge upgrade. Now that's going to be really interesting to see what it is that they were trying to cure and where they're at. But they've certainly lost their way at times. And, it's been a bit of a miserable time for Pierre Gasly in qualifying at times, somebody who's very, very quick, as we know. And if you don't start in the right place, it becomes a bit of an uphill struggle. So, yeah, I'd like to see AlphaTauri tracking in the right direction. They're not doing a bad job. It's just a legacy of how tight that midfield is. We keep banging that drum, but certainly 13th in points now, and, with some work to do. Yeah. And Yuki Sonoda, I mean, he's been interesting to watch. What's your assessment of him? Yeah, I mean, Yuki, he's under a lot of pressure as well. And we talk about his temperament and how fiery he can be. And he came under a bit of stick heading into the Austria weekend, talking about a sports psychologist and that kind of stuff. I don't think that's news, to be honest with you. I think it's news if an athlete's not working with a sports psychologist, given today's day and age. Good point. Good point. If you're not working with one, then why not? I don't think that's a negative. It's a negative if you're not working with one. It's a positive if you are working with one. So I think that stick was a bit unfair. But I think Yuki, that pressure that he's continuously under, and we know how difficult it is in that Red Bull fold, whether or not it's AlphaTauri or Red Bull with Dr. Helmut Marko and that constant scrutiny that you're under. And Franz Tost runs a fairly sort of old-fashioned and robust ship as well, so it's hard. And when you're always on the naughty step or there and thereabouts, it's difficult to catch a break. And I think the blessing is that he continues to get another opportunity, and it looks like he might get another opportunity next year. But I think if they change the approach with Yuki, I actually think we'd see a more relaxed Yuki. So all the emphasis is on Yuki to change at the moment. Well, let's actually change the performance environment to suit Yuki more.
That's good.
And see then what we can achieve. And that's what football managers are great at. You know, Jurgen Klopp or Pep Guardiola or whoever it is, they change the environment to make the individual feel welcomed. And that can have a big effect.
That's a great analogy. Really good.
Yeah. Alice, if there has been a disappointment this year, a pretty clear one, you have to say Aston Martin it's been pretty disappointing, hadn't it, Tom?
Yeah, definitely. And those two sort of wet qualifying sessions where it went away from them, where they were looking sort of really strong, and then it sort of rained in Canada and rained at Silverstone, and they certainly weren't at the races there, and back out in Q1, and they had a really hard start to the year, and then all of a sudden it looked like they turned it around, and everyone was quite excited, and then, like I said, they got that sort of banana skin of wet qualifying sessions, couldn't get it together, and now they're sort of back in the grips of being disappointing again. And they talked about having to understand their upgrades, so they didn't get any real dry running because it was a wet practice at Silverstone, then it was a rush weekend, then they had the sprint weekend in Austria, so you only have the one free practice before qualifying. They struggled to get together the upgrades that they bought at Silverstone to the table. And I think once they can try and get some stability, some dry running, this weekend will really help them in terms of understanding where they need to be. It's a smooth circuit, and the temperatures will be fairly consistent through the weekend. It'll be interesting to see if they can get their head around where they need to be and actually start to stop the rot again for a second time, because it has been a difficult year for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Vettel, as usual, I like the new Sebastian Vettel, where I think his messy hair kind of fits with his new persona of this, elder statesman, but
like a skate kid these days.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, but anyway, it's been fun to watch. What about Williams, Tom?
Well, Williams are exciting because I think they've got a top 10 car. Before I came on, I was looking at FP1, and I don't know where Albon finished up, but he was 8th at the time that I switched off. So they've been talking about having a top 10 car now for 1 or 2 weekends. And that's, again, we talked about the woes that Alfa Romeo have had over the years. Williams, it's been a difficult few years. And if that is the case, it's a big turnaround for a little team who are sort of re-galvanizing what it is that they're about and bringing in new investments. And, not a huge setup, not a factory team. And, for them to come to the table and beat some of the bigger teams with a huge amount of resource behind them and be a top 10 car, that's a huge feat and one that should be celebrated. So I hope that is the case, because Albon's a proper talent. And we've seen what Pierre Gasly can do coming back from disappointment at Red Bull. And I think that Alexander Albon is sort of enjoying that similar sort of experience. And if he can have the car to showcase, a bit like Pierre Gasly has had at AlphaTauri over the few years, if he can have a car to showcase what he's doing, then I think he'll be all the better for it.
Tom, I want to sum up with a couple things. One, I want to talk about the championship and what we think might happen, but I want to talk about the American influence on Formula One. Yes, we're now an American-owned entity with Liberty Media since 2017, but what do you think about what has gone on with Drive to Survive, with the influx of all these American sponsors? There's so much American money, particularly tech money, that's now in Formula One. And what do you think? Are you happy with the American influence of the sport, and you think it's a good thing?
Yeah, I think what Liberty have done is revolutionized the sport. It's much more inclusive and welcoming now Formula One was built on exclusivity, and it was a very, very different era. We've then transitioned into the digital world. Formula One was slow to transition into the digital world. Liberty have changed that. We've seen Netflix get given the access that they needed in order to deliver their Drive to Survive platform that has brought a huge number of younger fans, and fans that aren't necessarily going to watch every single race, but know about Formula One, that love the drivers, that love their favorite characters. You know, my partner's a prime example. She doesn't watch the races, but she loves Drive to Survive. Every time a new series comes out, she'll be sort of going through every episode during dinner. And that's the sort of excitement that Drive to Survive's brought to Formula One, and the opportunities within America, that bigger audience, the opportunity for commercial support, that in itself, that market, the opening up of the American market, something that was never, ever, ever achieved in the Bernie era, has revolutionized the sport as well, because now you have a lot of commercials within Europe and other corners of the globe that want to get involved in Formula One because it's opened up the American market. And having 3 races next year, maybe even 4 with New York in years to come, that just shows how big Formula One now is around the world, and how much America and the American audience is growing and embracing the sport as well. So I think having that market, which is such a big market, is fantastic. And to have new fans, I think, is absolutely wonderful. And we're an inclusive sport, so the more the merrier. Let's share the wonderful side of Formula One and what the sport stands for, and keep growing that fan base with access. I'm a great believer of access. I think that is so important. It's not an exclusive sport. It's not for the select few. You know, we want this sport to be inclusive, and the more we can break down those barriers, the better.
I can't tell you how excited we are to watch it explode right around us. Literally here in Austin, we've watched it go from, we don't even know what this sport is, to now people, when I literally last night, I was on the way home and I pulled up and I saw a guy next to me and he had an F1 bumper sticker.
Yes.
And thank goodness he had his window down. And I jumped almost out my window and I said to him, I said, "Hey, where'd you get that bumper sticker?" And he said, "I made it." Yeah, I couldn't find one. He said, "I took it to a printer and made it." And you could see him just light up that I was asking about that. And that, I forgot about that, Jonathan. I hadn't even told you that story. That happened last night.
That's hilarious.
And I knew he had made it because I've tried to find an F1 bumper sticker and they don't sell them. Yeah. So I told him that. I said, "I figured you made it." But it's really exciting, Tom, to watch what's happening. But speaking of exciting, I want to get you two veteran experts' opinion on what we're about to see here. We've gone from last year with this fierce head-to-head hatred between Hamilton and Verstappen to the almost bromance between Leclerc and Verstappen this year. But I have a feeling that may not stay such a friendly relationship as we get closer. What do you think is going to happen, Tom?
I think Max Verstappen and Red Bull will win the championship. And my main reason behind that is I just have reserves around Charles Leclerc, Ferrari, the turbocharger, the reliability. If they had no reliability woes, I would actually say, listen, this is going to go right the way down to the wire. And it's impossible to predict. If I had to predict, I think Max Verstappen. My heart says Charles Leclerc, just because I think he's a wonderful guy. I think it's a swan song story, having lost his father, and the strength that he's shown and the resilience of surviving at Ferrari under huge amounts of pressure, because a difficult place when things aren't quite going well. And I think Charles Leclerc manages that pressure really, really well. I think he's one of the most exciting young drivers. He's every bit as good as Max Verstappen. So my heart, I'd really love Charles to win, but I just think Max and Red Bull just have that edge at the moment. And the only disclaimer I'll put in is what's going to happen around some of the noise regarding the floor and this oscillation, the metric, how's that going to be measured? Will that come in? It's been delayed and delayed and delayed. You know, is there a hurdle or a speed bump in the road for us that we can't see yet? So that's the only disclaimer I'll put in. But at the moment, because Max has that advantage, I think he'll just hang on to that. But it can change, as we said at the beginning. 3 races and everything turns upside down on its head. And if they were starting even now, so they were even on points, even with the reliability woe, I'd say it's too close to call. But with the reliability woe and the deficits that Charles has, I just think Max Verstappen and Red Bull will have enough as the year plays on.
Jonathan Green?
Yeah, I don't want to push it too far, being the drama queen that I am, but I feel like we could see a Prost-Senna field to the end of this season, but including 3 teams. I think Russell's going to push Hamilton all the way. Checo's proved that he's capable of beating Max. And obviously the Ferrari woes are, you know, who finishes first? Sainz or Leclerc. So what I'm getting at is that Prost-Senna thing was so clearly an unmanageable situation back for McLaren. And I've got a feeling that this 3 teams are now going to be with that. And it's going to be interesting to see who deals with the dynamic of getting their team forward using both drivers to their best efficiency. Because we're going to get a situation where there's going to be team orders very, very soon.
What I will say is I actually think, and this could work both ways, but I actually think Mercedes coming to the table will hurt Charles more than it does Max, because Max has the advantage. So Charles needs to consistently take the points. You know, if Ferrari have a problem and they have to nurse a car or whatever it is, that's going to hurt Charles having the 2 Mercedes there, taking points away from him. So yeah, you could say same for Max, but Max has the advantage. So I think that'll hurt Charles, but I'm really excited to see what Mercedes have got up their sleeve this weekend and whether or not they can come to the table, because and I think it'll be qualifying when we start to see, like it was in Austria, where, you know, just before qualifying, we started, or in that, you know, first segment, we both looked at each other in the commentary box. So, you know, what's where's Mercedes been hiding that in practice?
Yeah.
And then obviously it went wrong for them when they both crashed. but they still had loads of pace. And that's a weekend that they weren't meant to be as strong as they were at Silverstone in Austria. And they still had the pace. So, you know, let's see what they have in qualifying tomorrow.
Well, it's just, I'm so excited to see the rest of this season, because we just don't know what we're going to find. And Tom Gaymor, by the way, that was brilliant insight today. I just think you were just spot on and made me think about things that I hadn't thought of all season. And that's fantastic. So we really appreciate you coming on the show, and we'll tell everybody to watch F1 Pro and the best of luck for the rest of the season.
Thank you. I'll be back for Hungary, and maybe we can have a chat later in the year as well, because I've really enjoyed being on the show. You guys have been awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely have you back. Well, thank you so much, and have a great week and great weekend. And we'll talk to you soon.